The murder of Cheryll Spegal. On October 19th, 1971, 10-year-old Cheryll Spegal woke up, got ready for school, and headed out to catch the bus. It was her birthday, and her brother said that she had slept in a little, and her dad said that he saw her leave the house around 6:30 a.m. But she never made it to the bus stop. For almost 2 weeks, local authorities interviewed family members, classmates, and neighbors. They also conducted a thorough search of the neighborhood surrounding Cheryl's house, but she hadn't been found. Initially, there was suspicion of this being a runaway situation and not a kidnapping. Local papers printed supposed sightings and theories as to where the young girl could be. Then on November 2nd, a milk delivery driver stopped to use the bathroom down an isolated country road. He noticed an odd stacking of rocks in a creek bed, and when he went to inspect it further, was shocked to find a small human arm hanging out of the pile. Authorities were quickly dispatched to the scene, and tragically this is how Cheryll Spegal's body was found. The 10-year-old had been stabbed nearly 30 times, and some of the wounds were so deep that they penetrated from her front side straight through to the back side. Her wounds were very small and round, and were also described as being in a circular pattern. There was evidence that she had also been sexually assaulted. An autopsy was performed, but unfortunately there was no DNA found on her body. Her clothing and a murder weapon were never found either, and this made it hard for detectives to determine if she was murdered where she was found, or if the killer had only chose the site to dispose of her body. Her father positively ID'd her body on the day of her brother's 11th birthday, and then on November 6th, a small funeral service was held for Cheryll. Sadly, she was laid to rest in an unmarked grave, and it took nearly 50 years before money was raised to buy a headstone for her. Authorities spent months that turned into years, and years that turned into decades, trying to bring her killer to justice. During investigations, the small-town police where the family lived partnered up with Kentucky State Police to hunt down the murderer. As soon as Cheryl's body was discovered, the hunt was on to ID the killer. The first man police had on their radar was a man who lived across the street from where Cheryl's bus would have stopped. Neighbors reported that the man would sit on his porch and sometimes in his car, just watching the kids get off and on the bus. Making things even more suspicious was the fact that his family owned the property where her body was found, and he was known to make frequent trips to that rural area. He then refused to take a polygraph test and refused to talk to police other than denying any involvement in her murder. That all seemed pretty damning, but he had what looked to be an airtight alibi for the morning of her murder. He worked as a day laborer at a company in Cincinnati, Ohio, and had a time card that had to be manually punched. He punched in the night before Cheryll went missing and punched out hours after Cheryl's disappearance. Also, a few neighbors came forward and vouched for him, saying at the time he never approached any of the kids and no one saw him or his car in the area the morning of Cheryl's disappearance. The second person of interest was a man who lived several doors down from Cheryll. He was a heavy drug user and was part of a local car theft ring. In fact, he ended up serving time in federal prison for his involvement in stealing cars. He was known to be quite violent towards people who crossed him and had a history of domestic violence as well. He also had a flimsy alibi the morning of Cheryl's disappearance, and when interviewed by police, told them that he had seen Cheryll the morning she disappeared, and knew that he was the last person to have seen her alive. He claimed to have seen her walking to the bus stop around 6:30, but he drove right past her. He agreed to take a polygraph test and passed it. A lot of people living on the street claimed to be scared of him still and suspected that he was the murderer. The third person of interest was the milk truck driver who discovered her body. This man lived several counties away from his job, but he drove every morning to work and picked up his milk from Newport, Kentucky. After he loaded his truck around 6 a.m., he would drive through several small towns, but most important to officials, he would drive right past Cheryl's house at approximately 6:30 a.m., the exact time she was seen leaving for the bus. Even more suspicious, his drive would continue south to a rural part of the county where he'd make his deliveries, and his route ended on the exact road where Cheryl's body was discovered. However, beyond these facts, there has never been anything tying him to the crime. He cooperated fully with police, passed a polygraph, and is said to have been truly devastated by his discovery. The fourth and final person of interest was a small business owner from the town where the family lived. He was not initially on police radar as being involved in Cheryl's murder, but several years after she was killed, he was charged with sexually assaulting minor girls and later pled guilty. There was also talk of him bragging about having stabbed Cheryl and putting her in the creek, but the man denied ever making those claims. Police interviewed him and he agreed to take a polygraph test. He passed, and beyond the claims of bragging about the murder, there was no forensic evidence that tied him to the crime. It is worth saying that Cheryl's dad and stepmother were never considered suspects, and her mother lived out of state and was not in the area in 1971. They all talked to police and they all agreed to take polygraphs. Every single one of them passed. However, a couple interesting facts still remain. Her dad said that he saw Cheryl leave for the bus around 6:30 a.m., making him the last person to see her alive. No one else reported to have seen Cheryl on the street, which would have been busy with other kids and parents out at about that time in the morning. After Cheryl was found, no headstone was ever purchased for her, and her family moved away only 2 months after the murder. Cheryl's brothers also report that their dad never talked about her or her murder again. Without any forensic evidence, and following the death of Cheryl's parents and everyone seen as a person of interest, current investigators need a miracle. Her clothes being found, a murder weapon, or even a deathbed confession is what is needed to find the killer that has now been free for more than 50 years. The Kentucky State Police welcome any tips regarding Cheryl's murder. The thought also remains that maybe the killer is none of the individuals identified by police during the investigation, and that the true killer is still out there. Who do you think is responsible for killing Cheryll Spegal? Let me know in the comments below.